I'm Jasmine Evans and I'm going to talk things all PMU and show you how I create my fluffy hair stroke machine brows. The key advice I would offer to anyone starting out in permanent makeup is to not expect to be really good straight away. You should see my old work. It was rubbish. I had to make a lot of mistakes, but I think that as the industry's changed, we're now a little bit more well informed with what pigments we're using, how to work ethically on skin. But the key is just to practice. So especially for hair stroke brows, there is a lot of creative freedom when it comes to hair strokes and where to place them, how fluffy the client wants it, how structured and neat. So the sky is the limit in terms of creativity, but I just think get some inspiration. There's lots of good artists out there that post their work on Instagram. Have a little pattern practice on just pen and paper. Find a pattern that's comfortable for you, make it your own and just keep practicing. Now I'm just giving Millie's brow a bit of a clean, just to get rid of any bacteria or oil or makeup that's on her skin. And I'm just using green soap for that. Okay, so once we've cleaned the brow area, we're just going to start by taking some clear before pictures of her without any makeup on. So if you can just open your eyes for me, Millie, and just look straight forward. So I'm just taking one from each side and then one from directly above. You can also take videos as well if you want it to be a bit bougie. I'm just brushing Millie's hairs up. She's wanting more of a fluffy brow style. We're not going to do the brow as a laminated brow because we've got to be mindful of current trends and how they might fade. But we are still going to give her quite a nice fluffy natural brow, and she has got quite a lot of natural hair, so it's just really to fill in the gaps and just make them look a little bit more fluffier. So if you can sit up for me, Millie. Okay, so now I'm just going to take some pictures of Millie sat up, and then we're going to start the mapping. Okay, so when I'm doing the pre-draw or the mapping stage, I like to use a white pre-inked mapping thread just to check symmetry really. I'm not one of these that maps vigorously, so I won't be doing all the mapping where there's lines on the forehead. I just pretty much do lines where I need it to be, just to check symmetry, just underneath and on top and where the arches are. And a lot of the work that I do, the mapping work, I do it freehand, so there's no real methodical way in which I map. Just lift your chin right up for me and close your eyes for me. So this brow is a tiny bit higher than this one, so we're going to sort of come somewhere in the middle. We still want the brows to look natural, and we want less maintenance overall. If we were to completely change the position of one brow, she'd have a lot more maintenance to do. And eyebrows are sisters, not twins. This mapping stage can get a little bit messy. So what I like to do is either use a micro brush or a cotton bud just to clean up any areas. So I'm just going to take into account a natural brow hair where it grows, and I can see that the arch is about there anyway, and the same on the other side. So I'm just going to mark that with a black Sharpie China marker. And because it is a hair stroke brow, it doesn't need to be bang on symmetrical like it would need to be if it was, say, an ombre brow or combination, because it's quite fluffy, it's not too dense, so any slight little differences you won't be able to notice as much. So just to let you know, I am not methodical at all when it comes to pre-drawing. I just pretty much freehand a brow, see if I like it, see if it looks good, use my eye to judge rather than measurements, and then I'd try and do the same thing on the other side. The reason why I try not to focus too much on measurements is because no one's face is the same on one side to the other. Sometimes people have a stronger muscle pull, your bone structure is different on one side. So we're just going to go with this one here. So if you just turn your face slightly for me. Perfect, and then back again. And with a hair stroke brow, if it's a fluffy hair stroke brow, which is what Millie wants, we can afford to go slightly thicker. So just lightly, ever so lightly, I'm just creating a bit of an outline, as you can see. And what I recommend is, when you're doing your outline, try not to press on the pencil too much, because you will prematurely blunt your pencil. And any slight little alterations you want to make, you can just wipe tiny sections away with a micro brush rather than wiping the full thing away. Now with fluffy hair stroke brows, because it's quite a natural brow, we don't want to be too archy or too rounded. So a little bit of a squarer, flatter brow shape would be perfect. So all I'm doing now is just neatening up any edges, and then we're just going to round this top line off just a little bit. It's not so pointy. Now, as a general rule, you don't want the tail to be lower than the bulb. You don't want it to have sad, droopy brows. So either in line with or just a little bit higher than the bulb is where the tail should be. I'm just going to neaten this bit up underneath. Okay, open your eyes for me. Perfect, so if you just turn your face for me. We've just done an outline. Now if this outline was for an ombre or combination brow, it might be a little bit too thick, but for hair strokes, it's a perfect size. So now to do the same on the other brow, which is the challenge. Now I know this one is a little bit higher than this one, so I'm trying not to cut off too much hair, but there might be just a couple of hairs on top that I might just want to cut out, just for symmetry reasons. So I don't know if you can see, but when I'm pre-drawing on, I'm actually using little etching motions rather than sticking it on the skin and dragging, because I still want this to be as sharp as possible. That being said, I do have another 5 pencils ready to go if this one gets blunt. So when I'm happy with a bit of an outline that I've done, I'm then going to start and wipe off any conflicting lines that might confuse me a little bit. So I'm going to rub these out. And unlike some people, I like to finish off by marking the fronts at the end. So now that I'm happy with where the outline is, I'm going to layer back down. We're going to crisp up the edges so that it's nice and neat. And I've just marked the front bits there where they're going to start. I am taking into account her natural brow growth, which is a little bit in front of that line. I don't want to bring them too close together, but I also don't want to ignore this little bit of fluff anyway. And these front bits are going to be nice and soft and natural, so it's not going to look too blunt and close together anyway. Again, no specific measurements have been used. It's just me going by eye and working with her natural brow hair. The products that I could not live without would have to be KWADRON needles. I really like QWADRON needles, they're just a good sturdy all-rounder. My favourite QWADRON needle would probably be a 0.35 medium taper 1 round liner. I use that for quite a lot of work that I do, and I also love Monica Ivani pigments because with hair strokes it's really important to get a heel that is nice long term. By using an inorganic pigment like Monica's, they allow for a nice fade out so that I can re-implant fresh strokes at the colour boosts. I really like using green soap just to help during treatments get rid of any pigment rather than wiping away vigorously, it just comes off straight away. And I have started using a pink Panthera one called Babool soap, and that's like a pink soap that it smells like bubble gum, so that's nice. So now all I'm doing is just going around the outside template, and we're just going to tidy that up to make it as crisp as possible without rubbing it away, just so that when we are placing our hair strokes inside the template, we're not getting confused and merging the outside lines with the ones inside. And then any bits that need reworking, you can just do it using a pencil again. This is the second pencil I think I've picked up. So by having multiple sharp pencils, you're actually saving time. Otherwise you would have to take yourself off and resharpen. Trying to draw on skin that's wet with the pencil is tough, so I always make sure I dry it before I start redrawing on. I'm going to start by removing some hairs underneath that aren't going to be part of the brow. Depending on how fluffy your client wants the brows, you could keep some hairs just to add to it. But if I can see that there's any that's majorly stepping outside the line, then I will just remove. And I do that using just a disposable facial razor. Once I'm happy with the outline that we've created and we've tidied up some of the hairs around it, I'm going to use my brow spoolie just to brush the hairs in certain directions and just see what sort of inspiration we can get from the client's natural brow hair. And then it can also help me to spot where the spine is. So the spine is the line where the hairs sort of gather and flow in the same direction. On any natural brow, you will get a spine. Some brows don't have spines, but in most cases you will get a spine. But then you'll also have conflicting hairs as well, which go against the rule of the spine, which actually make the brows a little bit more realistic and natural. So I can see a spine is about there and about there on that side. So I'm just going to mark that in with my pencil. And what I do is I just mark where the spine starts and ends so I can replicate it on this other brow. Just a rough guide. Now once the spine's in, we can start to add all the other connecting strokes. As the hair strokes get towards the tail of the brow, they naturally start to flatten. Now some of these hairs on the tail, instead of growing down towards the point, they're actually growing out a little bit towards this side. So we're gonna copy that. The issue that a lot of artists face when they are doing the tail is that they like to get it quite nice and uniformed. which can end up looking a little bit like a fishbone. So by adding a few conflicting strokes, we can just make it look a little bit more natural. So I've just done some top line hair strokes, just coming down to meet that spine. And then these front bits, we can do as messy or as tamed as we want. So then I'm going to start adding some little connecting strokes underneath. And then once I'm happy with the pre-draw, just going to mark underneath with a white pencil. Now this looks quite big and scary, because it's a lot of black blunt lines, but when it's actually tattooed in, it's pretty much the same thickness as a natural brow anyway, just a bit fuller. And pigment does shrink as well once it's healed, so if it looks a bit too big now, it should be just perfect when it's healed. When I'm doing ombre or combination brows, I'll never map this big usually. So once I'm happy with the pre-draw, I'm going to use some translucent setting powder just to set that template, so that when we do the first pass, we don't wipe any of the pencil away with the stretching fingers. I'm just going to dab this on, but generously. Then we're going to dust that powder away using a brow brush. Don't be scared to brush it off. The template should now be set, and then we're just going to do the same on the other side. Probably the most nerve-wracking thing to date was today. No, it weren't. The most nerve-wracking thing to date would probably be doing a live demo at the PMU festival, just because you can't ever predict skin, so you're really on the spot. But every time I get nervous, I just think, well, this little bit of uncomfortableness is actually going to teach me how to cope better in future. So each time I feel a bit uncomfortable, I just go with it and just do it anyway, and it just exposes me that little bit more, so the next time it's not as bad. So now that we're happy with the template, we're ready to start tattooing. So the pigment that we're going to use is Monica Ivani's Faux and Absolute Brown, and the ratio 50-50. Because of the fade, we do want a little bit of a kick, so that's why I've put Absolute in there as well. Okay, so I'm just about to start. I'm going to start in the middle of the spine, because that's the bit that we want to be a bit more dense. I'm going to test my pressure just across the spine and then work towards the tail. So my machine speed is around about a 5.5. Now everyone's machine speed is different, but I'm using the Dragon Hawk wireless piece and the Mass Tor, which are fairly reasonably priced. The reason I don't want a super fast machine is because I work quite slowly and I build up saturation quite slowly, and if I had a fast machine, it would encourage me to work faster, which I don't want. but also cause more trauma and actually deposit less pigment. So it's important to slow yourself right down. Again, techniques differ depending on what look you're wanting and also what pigment you're using. Because Monica's is an inorganic pigment, we do want to saturate a little bit more than, say, an organic pigment. And when I'm entering the hair stroke, I'm using tiny air motions before I touch base. Then once I'm midway into the stroke, I start to hold my needle in the skin a little bit longer to saturate the heart of the stroke, but still keep the ends and the beginning of the strokes nice and tapered and not too blunt. So I'm just doing tiny little forwards and backwards motions. So I'm just wiping away the tail and I'm just checking that pigment's been implanted before moving on towards the front. So because I've already set that template, I'm a little bit less worried about where I'm putting my fingers because I'm not as worried about rubbing it off. Just going to move these hairs out the way. Doesn't matter if you go outside the template just a little bit. So a few little microscopic bleeding spots can happen, but we don't want any huge trails of blood. We'd need to reassess this technique if there were a bit too much blood. It's just a really light surface scratch. And to layer more pigment, it's less about going deep, but more about keeping the needle in a little bit longer. A lot of technicians, especially when they first start out, they mistake saturation for depth, which is what I did when I first started. And as a result, I'm now lasering off a lot of my old work because it's just not budging. I do feel like that is down to the trainers that you train with, but the industry now is evolving and we are getting more responsible trainers. Okay, so I'm just going to check this before we move on again. Perfect. So now that we've done the first pass, we should see just very light hair strokes that we're now going to reinforce. Not every single hair stroke might need reinforcing, and we're going to concentrate mainly on the ones on the spine because they're going to be the ones that are denser. And when we are reinforcing, we're being mindful not to reinforce right from the end of the hair stroke because we don't want to make that blunt. So I'm going to go into a lot of these hair strokes midway and just come back on myself a little bit. And then if there's any little gaps that I think I might want to place a few more in just to fill up across that spine, then I will do. There's lots of different artists that inspire me. I think it's really important, if you have got an artist that's inspirational to you, is to book on a day with them, get to learn how they do it, because there's nothing better than hands-on experience with that person. And even if it's just a little tip like how they do their pre-draw, that might really change your game. And then what I'd say is get as many artists as you can to train with, and just make your own way of doing it. I've trained with some amazing people like Steph Toms, Gemma Henderson, and I don't know everything, and no one knows everything, so there's always more to learn. I'm just popping a bit of pigment on, just to soak into any little surface punctures that we've just worked on. Obviously this isn't going to soak too deep, but it's just going to make that work stand out a little bit. And we're going to do the third pass soon. So this is the third pass on this brow, and we're just going to saturate a little bit more, mainly across the spine and on the inside of these strokes. So now that we have completed the third pass, we've pretty much finished this eyebrow for now. I'm going to just move on to this other eyebrow, and then right at the end we're going to compare each brow and just add little tiny tweaks if need be. Okay, so we're just going to do the exact same thing on this brow as what we did on that one, and we're going to start off on the spine on this one. How I would look after my mental health as a PMU business owner is try delegate tasks where I can, focus more on the time taken on the art rather than the revenue, because there's nothing worse than having a client numbing up when you've not even finished another client. You get all flustered, you feel panicked, you get overwhelmed. So just take breaks and book out plenty of time in between treatments, and also have a shut off time for when you're answering clients back. Don't be messaging them back at 10 o'clock at night. The right clients for you will wait for you. So you can leave a stroke and then revisit it, but you've just got to make sure that when you do pop your needle back in the skin, you're hitting it on the line, bang on. So now I'm just going to do the same thing as what we did on the other side by just reinforcing these hair strokes again and just adding any little ones into any gaps that we see. My most memorable experience so far would be the group masterclasses that me and Paige do. They're fun, we just have a laugh, we swear, and probably be the conference winning the trophies. Is that cringe or what? So I won the 2023 UK PMU Conference for Best Hairstroke Artist and Best Eyeliner Artist. So we've just done the last pass on this side, and we're just going to get the client to just sit up and just check symmetry. Just be mindful that at this time there will be a little bit of swelling, so it's totally normal for one to look a little bit puffier than the other, one to look a little bit more redder than the other. We've trusted the pre-draw, and any slight amendments that we need to make we can just address at top up. Okay, so if you can just have a seat up for me. Okay, so I've just sat my client up and I'm just going to double check the symmetry. Like I mentioned before, it is totally normal for there to be some slight asymmetry immediately after treatment, but we're just going to have a look and just see whether or not there's any gaps that we need to add any more hair strokes in, if we need to enforce any more. And then what I'm going to do is just use a little dot of pigment just to mark certain sections that I just want to add a little bit more to. So I'm just going to get the client to lie down again. So we're just going to add a little bit in these areas that these dots are. These dots are just markers for where I need to concentrate on. We're not going to add too much because we don't want to still affect the symmetry too much if it is just a little bit of swelling. So we're going to do that, and as you can see, there is a little bit of redness around some of the hair strokes now that they've settled. That is totally normal. So it can give the illusion that the hair stroke looks a little bit thicker to start off with, but once that fades and softens, it does look lovely. Another thing to note as well, because we are using an inorganic pigment, I have had to put quite a lot of pigment into one hair stroke for it to stay. So we're just going to go in and add a little bit more to certain places. So if you were using an organic pigment, you would not need to saturate this much. This is purely because it's an inorganic. And if you remember, when we first started mapping the brows, we noticed that this one was a little bit higher naturally. So because of that, because it has some more hair growth at the top, you are going to see more visible tattooed hair strokes on this side, just where the arch is. Because on this side, where the arch is, there is a few more hairs covering up the hair strokes underneath. So a hair stroke brow is not to completely change the brow, but just to add more density, certainly in areas that are lacking. So we're just cleaning the brow area, we're just getting rid of any pigment, stains that might still be left on the skin. And we're just going to give it a nice clean. She will be a little bit sore now, so we don't want to rub too much. That's why I'm using the green soap, just to lift off any pigment that's embedded in between her hair. So what the client is going to notice when she has a look at the brows is that there will be quite a lot of colour density, a little bit of redness, a little bit of swelling. The hair strokes are going to be a little bit more intense until they've faded a little bit. But some people just like that. Some people like that colour pop. So before we show her in the mirror, I'm just going to brush her hairs into place a little bit, fluff them up. And she is naturally a person that does go red quite easy. And that's just real life. You do get clients that are a little bit more sensitive. Yeah, you can just see mainly on that side, a little bit more redness. That brow's had a chance to settle, so some of the redness is popping through a little bit. And then you've just got a little bit of redness underneath that one, but that's fine, that'll just disappear as it heals. So any little tweaks that we want to make, we'll just review in 6 to 8 weeks time. And we can either go darker, add a little bit more colour in certain places, add a few more hair strokes if need be, but we'll just wait and see how that softens. So now I'm just going to do the reveal, but I'm going to do it while my client's laying down, because I like to see, I like the client to see all the detail underneath the big lights. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. If you need any more information, we will be popping links in the description box below about me or my training.